Department of Health and Human Services and the Obama administration. So today on this call, we're going to be talking about recruiting participants to take part in creating community solutions events. So if you go to that next slide there, Rebecca, we'll have a sense of kind of what our agenda is today. If you have other questions not related to recruitment, we'll try to get to those if we can, but obviously the main thrust of today is to talk about how do we get people to participate. Who are you targeting? How many people are you trying to bring to the table? How are you going to recruit them? What kind of message are you going to use to kind of help them understand why this is going to be an important and meaningful opportunity for them? How can you reach particular segments of the community that you really want to be part of this? And then how do you make it as logistically as easy as possible for people to take part? So several people are going to help out with this, and we are lucky to have two absolute experts on recruitment, having done it in a range of different kinds of settings with us today. One is Larry Schooler, and one is Gloria Mengual, and I'll let them both introduce themselves. Go ahead.
I guess since I'm on the left, maybe I should go first. But thank you very much, Matt, for inviting me to be part of this call. I really, especially sharing the stage with you and Gloria, feel a little bit out of place because I don't necessarily have near the experience that the two of you have, but it's great to be part of this. I am a public participation professional based at the city of Austin, Texas, that some of you may have heard of, and I also am the president of the International Association for Public Participation, the United States affiliate. And so through that lens, I've gotten a chance to take a look at best practices around the country and also to some degree the world, and have spent a lot of time thinking about the best ways to convene people, and sometimes those are, large summit workshop kind of events, but sometimes they're, more intimate conversations that are either part of a big event or fanned out across an entire community or beyond. And also using technology, including television and internet resources and even telephone resources to stretch, to recruit and to stretch the reach of a public engagement process. So very happy to be part of this, not just today, but also part of the effort more generally, and look forward to your questions and comments.
And I'm Gloria Francesca Mengual, and I'm a program officer here at Everyday Democracy, which formerly was known as the Study Circle Resource Center. It's an organization that has worked with over 600 communities around the country on a myriad of issues, from race to immigration, to education, to growth and sprawl, you name it, a broad range of issues. And what we do is take our learnings from communities and share them with others. In my personal sense, I work with communities on organizing for dialogues. I train dialogue facilitators, and then following the dialogues, I'll work with groups of action teams on helping them move their ideas forward and getting over what I call the groan zone, that they sometimes get stuck, they don't know how to move forward. And I, too, am honored to be part of this webinar and the project overall.
And we will try not to have a groan zone.
I just want to quickly chime in and say that, well, I was just going to chime in and say that actually I know the groan zone as a formal term of art, that it's something that we really almost always have in community dialogue, because you're trying to sort of get some folks to unpack baggage and to be able to participate sort of forthrightly by like I said, unpacking some of the things that they may be bringing to the conversation. So even though I know she meant it in jest, I think it could end up being a part of the kind of dialogue that we all undertake. So
great.
Absolutely.
Terrific. So I'm Matt Leininger, and I'll just say quickly that I run something called the Deliberative Democracy Consortium, that it's an alliance of nonprofit practitioner organizations, including many of the ones who've been involved in this particular project, and the other set of people who are involved in DDC are academic researchers who study public participation. So the idea is to try to help, and actually many of those people are also involved in research aspects of this process. The other person who's very important to this, whose voice you probably will not hear, is Rebecca Reyes, and she is the Wizard of Oz in this webinar. She is kind of controlling everything behind the scenes, and will be kind of dealing with the chat questions and things like that. Rebecca works for Everyday Democracy and has also done a lot of work. I think actually you'll have Rebecca in action here because we've got a poll, if I'm not mistaken. And the poll has to do with kind of having you tell us a little bit about yourself, trying to understand, kind of want to make sure that we're getting to some of the kinds of questions that you have in this webinar. Here we go. Okay, so, and you just click on the button here. Please tell us if you are considering facilitating an event in my community. Are you considering hosting an event in your community? Are you a researcher? Are you a mental health provider, or someone else? Or play some other kind of role in the community. And this certainly helps us understand kind of what questions you might have. By the way, also, while we are still talking here, that you're all obviously muted. However, if you want to kind of start queuing up questions for us, you can type them into the chat box right there in the panel there on the right. All right, so once we're done with the formal presentation part, we'll certainly open it up so that people can also then verbally clicking that button, and then Rebecca will then call on you. So, I think we're still, oh, there we go. Okay, so the majority of this, so with which makes sense, recruitment, and then in terms of figuring out who's part of this process. Hopefully this will be answering some of your questions as well. So we go on to the next piece here. The next slide we've got. I'm sorry. Another quick question for you. So, how experienced are you at designing community engagement or public engagement processes? A, I've never done this before. B, I've only done it once or twice. C, I've done it a few times. Or D, I do it all the time.
I'm feeling very disenfranchised by not getting it.
Yeah, right. And obviously, a lot of you are people who do this all the time, and so I think if you have suggestions as well as questions, we'll be anxious to hear those. So one of the things we've been trying to do in all these different locations where people are interested in organizing something is trying to put them in touch with one another so that people who are new to this are able to work with people who are experienced at it. So most of you are in C, well, not most of you, the largest number are in this category of having done it a few times, and then followed fairly closely by once, or never done this before, and then once or twice, and then I do it all the time. So a good kind of range of different levels of experience. Great. All right, so then the next kind of part we want to do is kind of give you a little bit of background, quickly at least, on the kind of the general, the whole picture of this project. So on June 3rd, President Obama at an event, a day-long conference at the White House, launched this process and kind of gave all kinds of rationale about why this is a significant issue that most people, many people face, and the community certainly face. And so it's a joint effort of the administration side of the Department of Health and Human Services, and within HHS, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, which is the federal agency most devoted to mental health issues. So if we go on to the next slide, it gives you a kind of a quick rundown on creating community solutions, which is the part of this which will be kind of focused on engaging people at the community level and talking about this issue and figuring out what they might want to do about it locally. So what we're trying to do is create, support people in many communities to kind of engage citizens in this issue in all kinds of ways. And so if you are interested in kind of having a small kind of conversation, that's great. If you're trying to do something that's going to engage hundreds or thousands of people in your community, that's terrific as well. The point is to kind of get as many different kinds of things going as we possibly can. There are 10 lead sites where the planning started a little bit earlier, 10 sites where local officials, I think all mayors, stepped forward and said they wanted to do something in their community to have a large-scale action plan and process. And so a couple of those lead sites are actually kicking off later in the month, Albuquerque, New Mexico, which Gloria has been involved in, and Sacramento, California, followed closely by Birmingham, Alabama, I think 2 weeks later, and then there will be several other sites that have their large-scale events starting later on in the year. So the goals of the conversations, though, are to kind of, first of all, to break down the misperceptions and to help people learn about mental illness, recovery, how it's possible to strengthen mental health in their communities. Another goal is to help people find solutions, and they can be new, totally innovative solutions. They could be also things that have worked in other places. The point is to kind of figure out what could be helpful in our schools, in our communities to strengthen mental health, particularly for young people. And then the third main goal is to develop more concrete action steps for people to move forward that complement existing local activities. Now, those are going to be most possible in situations where you have a larger number of people going through multiple sessions in the discussion guide. It won't be as likely if it's simply a kind of a one-hour conversation. So it's important to know, I think, depending on kind of what you're organizing, what you're trying to do, what the likely outcomes are going to be. So if we move on to the next slide, we get to the sense of kind of the benefits. And so if you are doing a larger scale kind of effort where you're not just organizing one group but having multiple conversations, then obviously you are generating much larger awareness in the community about these issues. You're building a larger number of relationships among different kinds of people, community members, mental health providers, public officials, funders, all kinds of people who have some connections with this issue, relationships that will help them take action. And then, of course, by involving many different kinds of people, you are perhaps engaging people who may never have had an opportunity to kind of address some of these kinds of issues before, and they have all kinds of significant things to raise and to contribute. And then finally, of course, what you're trying to do here is have a community-wide impact on the issue. So the kind of, we go to the next slide here. There's a kind of a standard format that we've been using with these discussion groups, and this kind of typifies what we have seen to work in many, many different kinds of public engagement efforts over the last 20 years. But it's very simple. I mean, these are kind of very, very basic suggestions we have for you, which is to kind of engage people at a manageable level. So even if you have hundreds of people involved, you want them in groups of no more than about 8 to 10, so that they can really be heard, learn, understand each other better, really take a good close look at the different kinds of options in their community and plan for action. Those things are much more likely to happen if the group is no more than about 10 people. We're hoping that you will be trying to have a diversity of participants, all the different ways you have diversity in your communities, age, race, ethnicity, income, all these different kinds of things, lived experience with this issue. That another kind of piece that is successful is having a couple of facilitators, if you can manage that, so that people can actually trade off and support each other in that facilitation role. And then the last piece is using the discussion guide that has been developed by SAMHSA to help structure the conversation. To answer an obvious question, the official guide is now being formatted, so there's been kind of a long wait for this, but we are now finally at the stage where we can say, yes, very soon now we will have a fully approved and formatted version of the discussion guide for everyone to look at and use. The guide follows a standard sequence, which again has worked in many, many different kinds of public engagement settings, a sequence that has people start by talking about why they care, what experiences they have with this issue that makes them want to talk about it, what things that have happened to them in their lives that make them feel that this is something that's significant in their community. Then from there, giving people a chance to identify challenges that they're facing, that organizations, that projects, that youth programs, that schools face in trying to address this issue. Then there's a next piece which focuses much more specifically on young people in particular. And then finally, the last piece of in the sequence is getting people to talk about action. What ideas do they want to start working on? What kinds of ideas would they think would be good things for organizations or decision makers in the community to take on? And above all, what kind of plan do they want to help put in place for their community? So those are the kind of the basics that we're suggesting to people, and there's many different kinds of adaptations or improvements on this you might want to suggest based on things you've done or things that you've read about. One kind of general kind of variation here is that in some places people often do these as kind of a one-day event. So even if you have hundreds of people, bringing them together in one Saturday, for example, at an auditorium, some kind of large space where they're going to be in small groups for most of the time, but they're also going to be in the same location, so they might be hearing the same presentation or having the meals together or hearing at the end of the day what some of the shared conclusions were. Another format for this that often communities use is to have, instead of one location, having multiple conversations that happen over several days or weeks, so that people may be talking in their neighborhoods or their church basements or their firehouses, various different locations that maybe are more accessible to them, and to do that for 3 Tuesdays in a row or something like that, where they go through a couple hours of the discussion material each time. So there's kind of pluses and minuses of each of these general formats that we can get more into during the call if we need to. Okay, so I think that's the conclusion. Guys, anything else that Gloria or Larry that you thought I should cover? If not, I think I'm turning it over to you.
That was great. I think it's probably my turn to talk a little bit about some ideas for kind of attracting people to a process. Some people may think about convening community dialogue as just that event that you're trying to bring them to, but to me, I think there's a need to think of this as more than just get people to come to one event. It's to kind of get them invested in a process that goes beyond that event, or to convene them in a way that's not just, hey, we're having a meeting, please come. Because for a lot of people, they've sort of committed all of the time, they've budgeted all of their time to their professional life, their family life, and then their sort of community life by affiliating with different organizations. And so there's not a lot of extra time left over for them to come to an event convened that's not kind of on their existing schedule, if it's not just for entertainment or something. So in Austin and in a number of other cities, we've been experimenting with the idea of use existing social capital and having conversations happen within the confines of those organizations, or even within a family setting or some other a citizen facilitator I was talking about, and host his or her own conversation in a setting that's familiar. So it could be a church group, it could be a scout troop, it could be, like I said, a family dinner table, it could be a political group or another special interest group, but just use the existence of that regularly scheduled meeting and that time that people have already committed to be involved in conversation to have a conversation on these topics. And so what it really helps with is to cater to the schedules of your community, because as I said, they're already setting aside that time usually to be part of something other than work or their family life, so it's convenient for them to participate. It's flexible in the sense that it's up to the group to kind of manage their own conversation, even though we provide them with guidelines, but it's a little less rigid than it might be at a formally called meeting. It might also be safer because in some cases folks are just more comfortable sharing their personal feelings or particularly their experiences with mental health or mental illness in a setting where they either know more of the people or have something in common with them, like they're in the same neighborhood, the same religion, the same political group, what have you. And again, they might feel able to be a little bit more honest. So the meeting in a box that we've used in Austin follows to some degree models in other countries. I'm sure many folks may be familiar with both Portsmouth Listens and New Hampshire Listens, which has sort of a version of this with small group discussions all over the city. And then in other places like the state of Arizona, the city of Seattle, and a town called DeSoto, Texas, there are similar models like this. But the basic concept is to create a kit for a community organization or an individual to use to host their own meeting at a date and time that's convenient to them, and then provide an easy set of means to convey back the information that was gleaned from their meeting, whether that be an online form, a phone line to call, a fax, a mail, whatever the resources might be. But we find that this kind of decentralized approach can often yield some really interesting results in terms of groups that we may otherwise not have engaged, but who participate in this fashion. And I think we're about to ask another question.
Great. I think we are.
So, part of, I think, what Gloria and Matt and I just want to assess is which part of the preparation for community conversations is where you think you need kind of the most assistance, because there are a number of different tasks associated with doing this, and we want to see where we can potentially provide the most guidance. So we'll see what your input is, and then try to tailor our later remarks accordingly. Rebecca, are we?
Yep, there we go.
So the diverse audience, yeah, I kind of figured that might be the biggest challenge given the title of this webinar. So that's great. Yeah, I think knowing that is really important. One of the interesting things, we don't need to go back to my previous slide, but one of the interesting things about our meeting in the box experience was on one particular occasion, we had a group called the Asian American Cultural Center host maybe 20 meetings in a box in their same location. And so what that did was attract people who have a great affinity and loyalty towards that organization to be part of something that was convened by the city, but in an atmosphere and in a venue that really was much more comfortable, familiar to them, closer to where they lived, and where there were language resources available and facilitators who could facilitate in their native language. So I know diversity takes a lot of different forms. It's not just ethnic or racial or national, but I do think that it really makes sense to find community organizations that already have traction with your community and with your public to assist in convening these conversations.
Yep. Great. Well, that's a theme that definitely kind of reverberates through all of this. So I think we're ready. Can we get to the next slide then?
While we're waiting for the next slide,
go for it, Gloria.
The background on creating community solutions, and you formats of ways to convene people for conversations. And we're about to move into the focus of today's webinar, which is what 56% of you want to hear about, is how do we get them there?
Well, we may want to continue. We, I think, have our own copies of the presentation so that even if we can't show the slides one by one right this minute, maybe we can continue.
Yeah, and by the way, everyone, both the slides and also the actual audio recording of this will be available on the website afterwards. But yeah, Gloria, why don't you, I think it's you next with the start point slide.
Oh, here we go.
Yep. So here's some advice on recruiting participants, and your start point obviously is a series of questions, which is who, how many, and how. So you really need to think through who do you need to involve, which group, and human nature being what it is, it's very easy to just reach out to your neighbors and people from your house of worship or your community groups you belong to. So really thinking beyond that to people that aren't necessarily part of your world, but they do make up the community. How do we reach out to them? Really think that through. And also think about how many you need to involve to reach the goals that you have in mind. And I'll talk more about the how many in a little bit. So what might keep some of these groups from participating is something you should spend some time on and troubleshoot in advance so that you could think through how do you reach the hard to reach, because you really do want them there. As well as people who have different perspectives from you as an individual or the group that's moving this effort forward. Really, how do you reach these groups and get them to want to be involved? And then who from the team can reach out to these groups, or who does the team need? But before you can do any reaching out, you have to be ready to know what you're going to say. So developing your messages is the key upfront thing that you need to concentrate on. And the goal of the message is really to inspire who you're speaking to. You want to motivate them to say, absolutely want to join in on this effort. So to do that, you want to obviously localize your message. There might be something that happened in your community related to mental health that you could weave into the overall message of the effort that will motivate people to move forward and say, yes, I do want to do that. And your invitation needs to answer several questions. So what are we doing? What are we trying to accomplish? What's the overall goal here? And why does this matter to the person you're speaking with? You should always be in the other person's shoes, so the what's in it for me. So if you're talking to a member of the clergy and trying to get them to get their part of their congregation to come, your message would be very different than the mom of a young adult who's been struggling with mental health issues. So the what's in it for me is very different for those two audiences, so you would tailor your message to answer that for that person. So the how many, and some of you might already be event organizers, and if you do, you know the answer to this, but many people aren't. And you say, oh, I want to get together a group of 15 people to have a conversation. Well, you know that if you're going to get 15 people at that table, you have to have sign-up sheets from 20, because life happens, and the 20 that signed up are going to become the 15 at the table. And then how many you want to sign up, you need to back up and think, well, how many do I need to have heard? Oh, that's really interesting. I believe I want to do that. You really need to have 60, maybe 70 people show strong interest to get those 20 to sign up. And as a start point, before you get to the level of interest of those people, you need to have reached out to probably 300 or 400 people. And when I say reach out, I'm not talking about knocking on 300 doors or talking individually to 300 people, but using a variety of ways of reaching out, have reached out to really hundreds of people to get to the 15 that are sitting at the table. And we're going to get into now effective ways to reach out to potential participants. By far, the face-to-face conversation is what will get the most people there. People appreciate personal invitations. Phone calls also are very good and obviously very personal. Presentations are great because, you know, you get the word out to 40, 50 people, and you use whatever, 30 minutes of your time. So that's obviously very efficient. Traditional media, you know, newspaper, television, PSAs, all of that is fine. Although that's dwindling in effectiveness, obviously. Social media is great, especially with younger populations. And sample conversations are, I would say, right up there with face-to-face conversations. Like, inviting someone personally really motivates them as they hear about it and want to know more about it. But if you could talk till you're blue in the face about, oh, let's do this dialogue and this is what could come of it. But it's not until, as Nike says, you just do it that you get it. So having sample conversations where people just sit down and even do this conversation for 15 minutes really drives home the message. Because people are like, yeah, I know, okay, I've had conversations, I get it. It's really in the process of sitting down and going through questions that build on each other that people get the aha moment and see where it could go.
Gloria, is there a way I could chime in really quickly?
Please.
I just wanted to chime in support of a couple of things that she was saying and add a little bit to that. One is the face-to-face conversations. I think that in a lot of communities where engagement really mobilizes a lot of people, you have these kind of groups of champions, and I may even have a slide on this actually later on in my presentation, but my point is that it's helpful not just to have the folks who are convening the conversation do those face-to-face conversations, but have a wide array of community opinion leaders and community leaders to help get that message out to the people that really trust that community leader. So have those face-to-face conversations be ones that are happening with a lot of different people starting the conversation, not just the the convening group. And the other thing with traditional media is that when we were talking about the idea of a sample conversation, I was actually thinking of having a sample conversation on the media, meaning that the local public radio station or the local PBS station or even the newspaper that could stream some video might have one of these sample conversations on the air, which gives people a sense of what it's like, and then they may want to do one themselves. We've seen that work in Austin, so just a thought.
Great, thank you. So I mentioned about reaching out to the hard to reach and really going out of your way to do that. So here's taking the extra steps to recruit from these groups is extremely important, especially in this particular effort. Reaching out to youth and thinking about creative ways to recruit from youth-led groups is important. So schools, clubs, sports teams, any other organizations that serve youth are really good places to reach out to them, as well as obviously getting people who have lived the experience of either having a family member who's struggling with a mental health problem or the youth themselves that are struggling with the problem, be part of that. Because you don't want people just looking at stats and talking about it third party. You really want that firsthand experience, that I experience at the circle. And then always thinking about the culturally and economically diverse groups. So, finding someone from within those groups to reach out within those communities to help spread the word. And that's not necessarily formal leaders. That's the Mrs. Rodriguez, who's in her 80s and lives in the middle of the block, and everybody takes off their hat to her when they go by, and you don't swear in front of her porch. Reach out to people who really are respected in communities to help get the word out and explain why it's important for their involvement. So in terms of reaching to the hard to reach, some places that are really very effective for reaching out are the corner store in a low-income neighborhood. I know in Kansas City, we kept inviting the Latino community to come to dialogues, and people would say, oh, yeah, I'm coming, but they wouldn't show. And, on the second or third round of dialogues a year later, we're really deciding we've got to do something creative. So we did these sample dialogues I spoke about earlier where people sat down and just took a discussion guide and did bits and pieces of it and discussed it. And we set up the tables in the back of a bodega, a corner store. And people coming in to buy their milk or their cheese, ¿qué pasa? What's going on over there? And the guy at the cash register is like, go, sit down, have a seat. And through that first-hand experience, people are like, oh, I like that. Me gusta, yes, I'll come. So that's a really good way to reach out. Go into the neighborhoods people live and work in. Barbershops and beauty parlors, specifically in Latino and African-American communities, at least I know, those are hubs. Those are social hubs where people talk about the news of the day, what's happening, who's getting married, what's going on in the world. So those are wonderful places to reach out. Social hours following a religious service are always very good. It's a great way to reach out to multiple people. And again, a sample conversation and not just talking at them is great. Obviously, social service agencies serving the targeted groups you're trying to reach. And festivals and fairs are wonderful. It's deadly if you just stand by a table. And even if you have a bowl of candy to draw people to the table, it's pretty tough just talking about what this dialogue thing is. It's, again, sample conversations. Have a few chairs in front of that table. Grab a few people and just have them do it. And you'll have a curious crowd that will start convening. Well, what's going on there? And now I'm going to transition it back to Larry, who's going to talk about some really creative examples of how to reach out into the community.
Thanks very much, Gloria. And like I said, I really feel a little out of place on this with how much work Gloria has obviously done to really get deep into a community and try to recruit folks to an effort. I want to talk just briefly about a concept we've kind of worked on called Speak Week, and it's not something that we invented. It's just a brand that we gave to really being out in a community on our socks and shoes and really trying to meet people where they actually are. So actually this picture is taken from a community festival where I and some other folks were out at the festival, had a booth of our own, and we were soliciting input, in this case on a mobility plan, and we had magnets to represent different modes of transportation, and we were asking people, old and young, to give us their input on how to effectively get people around Austin, and they could slide magnets around, and then we took pictures of what they came up with. The concept, though, is basically to be where people already are going rather than always expecting them to come where you want them to come. So to go to those big events, to go to those popular public spaces, even those popular private events like a big football game or a big sports event or something, where you just expect a lot of people to be gathering, and so you're going to try to catch people as they go by. And you can do it either with a low-tech display like this or a poster or something, or you can just be there with a brightly colored shirt with some logo and a tablet computer of some kind to capture some input and feedback that way. So it doesn't need to be particularly fancy. The point, though, is to really try to engage people who aren't engaged by just being where they're already going and letting them know about this opportunity. And so it's obviously convenient, it's safe, it's often anonymous. They're just putting notes on a page or sticker dots or what have you. And it's for people who may only have a few minutes but would like to meaningfully contribute to the conversation. And so they're not having to schedule this, they're not having to make time for it really other than a few minutes as they pass by a popular spot. Another really important resource that I think a lot of people overlook is the existence of public access TV channels. So almost every city in the United States of any size, but even some of the smaller cities, have the use of a channel, either all 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, or part of a week. And that channel often it just gets used to play and then rebroadcast government meetings. But in Austin and in some other cities, we're seeing the channel get used for real programming. And so when we talked earlier about the idea of having an event, a large event, one of the ways that you can really engage a broader swath of your population is to put that event live on that channel for little or no cost. Of course, if you've got a commercial station or even a PBS station to broadcast it, I think it would be even more attractive to a wider audience. But at little to no cost, you can utilize that resource to extend the reach of your meeting. And through the use of technology like text message-based voting, there are several platforms that do that, one of which is called Poll Everywhere, through the use of telephone town hall technology where you can make a toll-free number available and even call out to thousands of numbers to invite people into the conversation. You can really involve people in a larger conversation, but potentially still in sort of a small group setting. So you can have a sort of a chat room capability the way we used to have more of in the early days of the internet. I've been on conference calls where the call might have a lot of people on it, but they're still able to segment it off so you're only talking to 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 people. But the bottom line is that instead of just expecting people to show up at a physical spot, you can consider utilizing both live TV, live internet streaming, as well as produced videos that can be circulated via social media and on television to let folks know what's happening, but utilize the resources of that government access channel or that public access channel with a lot of volunteer videographers to help produce some content that can then be circulated and engage people in the dialogue. And last but not least, this actually goes back to what I was talking about during Gloria's slide. It's the use of champions to kind of assist in recruiting people. So these are people who have shown a willingness to commit more than just an hour or two of their time to the community. Sometimes this takes the form of a task force or a working group or a board or commission in a city government, like a planning commission. There are groups like a neighborhood college or a City Works Academy. A lot of cities now have developed these classes for adults where they get kind of a survey of all the different functions that a city performs. And a lot of times when they get done with that, they really want to be involved to a greater degree. And this is one way to do that, is to make them sort of a team captain to get folks to a conversation. Austin Core is our high school leadership program and is another way, in addition to youth councils, to use kind of champions to get more people involved. And I've listed just a few others that I think just enable you to turn to people who already have the trust and respect of people in the community to really get the community involved. So I strongly encourage the use of those kinds of champions to have it be more than just an agency making that ask, but also champions like this. And I think back to Gloria.
Logistics. In terms of logistics, you really want to make it logistically as easy as possible for people to participate. So you want to pick a trusted, accessible location. I'll just give the example of a community that was doing conversations around community police relations, and they tried to set up a dialogue in the courthouse. Well, it wasn't very well attended. So think about where people really trust, what's their neighborhood hub, and that's often a school. Those often are neighborhood hubs, or could be the barber shop. It could be a youth center. Also think about convenient times for participants. If a lot of people in a particular neighborhood work second shift, then the evening probably not going to work. I know in one community, the Hmong community basically said the only time we can do this is after our church service. We don't really want to do this conversation with anyone else in the community. We want our group to do that, and we're going to do it not, and the format then was 2 hours over a 4-week period. They said we're going to do it for 8 hours in one day. That's fine. If that's what works for the group, go for it. Offer childcare. One of the main things that happens when organizing these is that young parents, or parents in general, can't make it because they have toddlers and there's no one to take care of their children, and there's just too much to do in too few hours of the day. So the easier you make it for people to get there, the more likely you're going to have good attendance. So having childcare, offering translators if there are multiple languages spoken, providing refreshments, and in fact a meal. If you're doing something during dinner time, then you know what, some pizza or whatever, a salad, just having some food for them would increase chances that people will come. It's one less thing to do when they get out of there. Transportation, whenever possible, that really helped in a community that was not being well attended by some of the ethnic groups, and they got volunteer drivers to bring people and take them back. And if you have hearing impaired or visually impaired participants, think through what you can do to make this a worthwhile experience for them as well. I'd like to say one other thing. I just want to back up in terms of something I mentioned earlier, which was about getting the word out and developing key talking points as your start point. It really is a very important first step, and if you need to, practice with each other till you get comfortable. And the key thing to remember when you're getting the key message out is use your own words. You might come up as a group, as a planning group, with this is what we want to say to the community. Take it home and just sit with it and think about how would I say that, because you really want to speak with your voice in order to really get the passion of it, the commitment into your message. The other thing about it is you, along with personalizing it, which is great, you still should have a common vision that you're describing within your message, and all of you agree to use that common vision along with your personalized approach to it, because that is what someone, if they hear from 3 different people in the community about it, and they keep hearing the common vision you tie into your personal delivery of it, that repetition is key to having it stick with people. And in any communications, repetition is key. And the important thing to remember when you're going out with the invite and recruiting people is you're not just providing an infomercial. You remember to close your message. And you have to close it with the message of answering the question, what's in it for me? And make the ask, hey, come to this. So definitely make the request at the end of it. And I just want to shoot 2 quick examples of what's in it for me and how to weave that into your message. Let's say you're talking to the parent of a young person who is struggling with mental health problems. So they're wondering, why should I don't want to do this, and I don't want to expose Johnny to this, and why are you asking me this of me? If you could explain that this will be a way to get others to better understand your family experience, your son and his personal struggles, that's the kind of thing that's the what's in it for me that a parent will just give an aha to that. And yeah, this is very true. Or if you're talking to a school counselor and you say, as part of your what's in it for me, this is a great way to give your students an opportunity to be heard and to explain their life experience. So again, depending on who you're talking to, that part of the conversation, that closing part of the why you should come to this and become involved is key to motivate people to act on it. And at this point, we welcome any questions.
So people can raise their hands and I can unmute you if you'd like to ask your question. out loud. Otherwise, you can type it into the question box. We do have one question already from Sarah. I'm going to mute the panelist while I ask it because I think there's some feedback on here. The question is, if the different groups have meetings within their own groups, then how do we get the circulation of ideas? I thought the goal was to have the discussion groups be diverse. So this was a question a little bit earlier, I think more directed at some of the things that Larry was talking about, but of course anybody can feel free to answer it.
Forgive me, I'm sorry, was there a question, or am I waiting for one?
Yep, so the question was, if the different groups have meetings within their own groups, then how do we get the circulation of ideas? I thought the goal was to have the discussion groups be diverse. So she's trying to, ask about diversity versus broad exposure.
No, that is a little bit of a trade-off. I'll concede that. I mean, I think the best case scenario to some degree is a diverse group with multiple perspectives. But to be quite honest, I really feel that even in a group of quote-unquote like-minded people, either from the same neighborhood or the same faith or something, on an issue like this, I really believe that you could have a very diverse array of opinions. So that's taking diversity less from the vantage point of ethnicity, race, or otherwise, and thinking about it more in terms of the diversity of thought. Now, if you really are after a diverse array of people from those different nationalities and races and backgrounds, then I think part of your mandate is to think both in terms of a universally popular place for everyone to go to, or it's also important to be sure that you're reaching out across not just traditional media like the main daily newspaper, but newspapers that might cater to certain populations, the Spanish language newspaper, the African American community newspaper, Asian language papers, and so on, and also to sort of be in those spaces that are most inviting to that broad array of people, and to reach out through those multiple channels, I think is really important. But I guess I would also say that there could be organizations in town who already attract that kind of diverse participation, whether it be a United Way or a other kind of social service agency that has a diverse group, a board of directors or otherwise. A transit agency that has a community advisory group might be very diverse. So, I think it's an important point, but I also think that, again, this particular topic or set of topics is going to really get an interesting mix of experiences and diverse array of viewpoints, regardless of whether you have a mix of ethnicities and nationalities and races around the group. So just a thought.
And just a word about affinity groups. We work with affinity groups pretty often, and for example, just people of color getting together and having a conversation in advance of speaking and being in a mixed group in the general community. And that's a way for them to become more comfortable with the process. And when you're thinking about this particular effort with youth struggling with mental health challenges, it might do very well for a group of youth to experience what this dialogue is like among themselves. So their comfort level rises when they're thinking about, okay, I'm only going to be there'll only be two youth that are in this larger group sharing the crux of our challenges. And that's pretty scary. So an affinity group made up of youth struggling with mental health challenges, experiencing that dialogue up front is going to bring their comfort level up. So that's a reason to do that as well.
So I haven't received any other questions so far. If people want to raise their hand or type a question in the chat box. And actually, Sarah responded to your answer. She said, good answers, make sense, thank you. So it looks like you answered a question.
Reminds me of that game show host on Family Feud. Good answer, good answer, good answer. Well, let me, I guess in the absence of questions right now, just chime in and say that, what folks are trying to undertake that are part of this conversation, this is a weighty undertaking. I don't mean to say that like, Gloria and Matt and I are superhuman or anything. I just mean to say that I've been doing this for a while and still have a lot to learn about how to do it well and how to do it effectively. And so I think it's really important to ask for help, to use the social media that this effort has. I know there's a Twitter handle and a Facebook page. There are other people doing this kind of work all over the country. There's, of course, the website. Don't be afraid to seek out the advice of folks doing this. And let me particularly mention NCDD, the National Coalition of Dialogue and Deliberation, and IAP2 USA, my organization, and our website is iap2usa.org, and theirs is ncdd.org. And on those websites, you can find people who are involved in those organizations and who have backgrounds in this work and who really would be more than happy to assist you. In fact, just today I was talking with some colleagues who are wanting to assist with a nascent effort in Wisconsin. So we have a lot of people embedded within our organizations who are willing and able to help. It's just a matter of finding them and asking. So I strongly encourage you to do that, and also look to universities like the University of Arizona. The University of Texas has a Center for Public Policy Dispute Resolution and a Center for Civic Life. I know at Portland State in Oregon they have a center with some professionals that do this kind of work. So that's all resources that are available.
And if I could add to that just quickly, so the online map at creatingcommunitysolutions.org is obviously one way to find other people and have other people find you. So if you're seriously interested in doing something, we don't care how small or large it is, please put a pin in the map, and that way other people in your area find you. And certainly, obviously, you can be looking at the map and seeing what other organizations out there have put their own pins in. And also, just call us, the headquarters here. One thing what we're doing all the time right now is helping people connect to other people we might know who might be helpful to them in those communities. So that's another function that we're trying to fill.
All right, so Libby has a question. So putting a pin on the map does not require a full, complete plan?
I'm sorry, say that, full or what?
Full, complete plan. Does
No.
putting a pin on the map require a plan?
No, basically it signifies a commitment. It basically says, I want to be part of this. I want to get some other people in my community to be talking about this issue and what we can do about it. And again, I mean, it doesn't matter to us whether that takes the form of a single group or 50. The important thing is that you're kind of committing to try to engage other people in your community. So no, it doesn't require a plan. No, it doesn't even require a sense of the scale, because part of what you may be doing is reaching out to other people and saying, hey, what do we want to do here? And if you find the right allies and feel like you got the capacity to do it, then you might want to have really large numbers of people. And if you only have a couple of allies who are going to help out with you, maybe it's a much smaller kind of thing. So it doesn't matter to us. The important thing is we want to have as many people be part of this process and to help improve mental health for young people as we can.
So we just have a couple more minutes. I haven't gotten any other questions, but people can feel free to ask questions too about, the National Dialogue on Mental Health, Creating Community Solutions, as Matt mentioned earlier in the presentation, as well as anything about recruiting that you want to ask while we have Gloria and Larry on the line.
Well, more questions.
Let me also just say that I'm happy to take questions that come up later via my email address, which I will type here into the chat window. I think it may only be visible to us, but if maybe Rebecca could display it for others.
No, it's on the slide here at the end.
Oh, it's there. Oh,
yeah,
there it is. Okay,
yeah.
Very good. Please email me if you need to.
Likewise, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. And thank you, Larry, and thank you, Gloria, and thank you, Rebecca, for contributing here. This is terrific. And it's a very impressive amount of knowledge you all bring to this. And I'm excited to continue working on it. Thanks, everybody. And please do